Hello, this is George from George's Music Blog, and today I'm talking about the new collaboration between Four Tet and William Tyler, 41 Longfield Street, late 80s. Now, Four Tet is someone who surely needs no introduction whatsoever if you're into electronic music. Kieran Hebden, as he's otherwise known, has recorded a great many albums, principally under his Four Tet alias. He is also a very well respected and successful DJ and has worked with a plethora of collaborators from different musical worlds, including the late free jazz drummer Steve Reed, dubstep producer Burial, Skrillex, Ellie Goulding, and many, many more. I personally have got all the time in the world for Four Tet. William Tyler, on the other hand, is not someone who I was previously familiar with. Hailing from Nashville, Tennessee, he has been a long-time member of a couple of eminent bands, namely Lambchop and Silver Jews, operating in the kind of experimental alt-rock, I guess you might call it, kind of experimental country sphere. Can't really speak with too much authority on that, as I have not listened to either of those bands, although Lambchop have been on my list of bands I should vaguely get around to listening to at some point, although I haven't actually made it up to this point. So definitely not someone who you would think of as an obvious collaborator for Four Tet, but then given his very open-minded approach and the fact that Four Tet's music has featured guitars prominently at various points, is also not the most unlikely pairing in the world. Tyler and Hebden's partnership began, as all the best ones do, at a music festival where the two bonded over a shared love of 90s experimental music. Everything from post-rock collective Godspeed You Black Emperor to Austrian ambient/noise artist Christian Fenez. His influence, the latter's influence, can be heard on this record, in my view, in the deployment of guitar as texture and empty space as architecture. Again, like many fruitful collaborations of recent years, the pair traded material remotely during the pandemic, which in 2023 resulted in the opulently psychedelic 12-inch Darkness, Darkness, a cinematic and groovy 10-minute acid trip that filtered West Coast psychedelia through Four Tet's musical kaleidoscope. It's a really cool track, and I would definitely recommend checking that out. But if you're expecting more in that vein, then you'll be surprised by 41 Longfield Street, which takes as its main inspiration American country and folk music from the 1980s. An unlikely but deep-rooted influence that the two artists found they shared, largely thanks to their respective fathers. Now, when Kieran Hebden first began recording as Four Tet in the early noughties, he was often slapped with the Folktronica genre tag, an attempt by music journalists, bloody music journalists, to succinctly sum up the way he used electronic production techniques to blend richly organic sounds into something soothingly pastoral but also wonkily left field. In reality, his sound and his approach bore no connection whatsoever to folk music, and he would find himself sharing festival billings and magazine space with artists from completely different musical worlds. Much of Four Tet's following experiments with free jazz on Everything is Ecstatic and later kind of minimal house on There Is Love in You could be seen as a way to try and shake off that inaccurate and unhelpful characterization of his music as Folktronica. But over 20 years later, is it finally time to reconsider that label? Because this new album could ironically fit the description Folktronica in its marrying of William Tyler's guitar playing with Kieran Hebden's electronic production wizardry. The result is something resembling an unhurried afternoon spent twisting the radio dial through 80s Americana, which embeds Tyler's measured guitar playing into soundscapes as drawn out and expansive as the Great Plains of the American Midwest. Not electronic as such, but definitely in keeping with Four Tet's very open-minded approach to his source material. Now let's get into some of the details, and the record opens with If I Had a Boat, an 11-minute mood piece which announces itself on smouldering guitar distortion before the sound of strings being strummed gradually materializes like a reflection materializing on water. After 2.5 minutes or so, things snap into crystal clarity with a plucked acoustic guitar refrain, which in fact turns out to be a relatively faithful rendition of the song If I Had a Boat by the American country singer Lyle Lovett. Definitely not an artist I am familiar with at all. Despite lacking lyrics, the track retains all the wholesomeness and bittersweet nostalgia of the original. Country music displaced from its country, if you will. Second track, Spider Ballad, is probably the most typically Four Tet sounding track here, with a minimal beat and a kind of endlessly echoing synth that shimmers in and out of focus over the course of several minutes. It's also got a bit of a John Hopkins vibe in the way it suggests something very grandiose and majestic, while in reality actually being very restrained. It's definitely nice enough, but it doesn't do a huge amount for me, to be honest. Generally, all that remains of country music on 41 Longfield Street is guitars. Generally recognisable as the sound of plucked strings or vibrating chords, or else just the shape of the instrument, the murmur of feeling as they glide through the mix. There's that, and there's also the emotional residue of country music, so to speak. The ache of longing, the pang of nostalgia for big open skies, the summer breeze on your cheek, the pain of first love's heartbreak, all that syrupy stuff. It is a sparse but gentle record which doesn't exactly broadcast its influences so much as reimagine and recontextualize them. And talking of broadcasting, there are two tracks here that both reference the radio. I Want an Antenna and Loretta Guides My Hand Through the Radio. Both of them are brief passing interludes that give the suggestion of a musical continuum, a reminder that music floats free on the airwaves and its context will always depend on where it ends up being broadcast, whether that is Nashville, Tennessee, home of William Tyler, or 41 Longfield Street, which is in fact the address that Kieran Hebden grew up at in the 1980s. And random fact, it's also about 20 minutes walk away from the address I was living at as a very young child in the late 1980s. Strange to think we might both have walked across Wimbledon Common at the same time at some point. Given Hebden's description of the recording process, with the pair each laying down extended improvs on guitar in the studio, which he would then take back to his computer and bring it to my other world, in his words, you get the sense this was a record that was composed via a process of subtraction rather than addition. On some tracks, all that's left of guitars are digital fragments of sound making rhythmic textures. That's another quote from Four Tet there. Coming into this, to be honest, maybe I was feeling a little bit saturated with Four Tet's music, having listened to a lot of his albums recently in preparation for creating some more videos on them, and maybe I was expecting something a little bit different from this release. But 41 Longfield Street is sometimes a little bit too sparse for its own good, especially the midsection, which consists of the track When It Rains and Timber, where I just wanted a little bit more meat on the bone. Each track is a meditative study of layers of guitar, minimal but lush, but in each case I was just yearning for a little bit more direction, for Four Tet to take William Tyler's picks and plucks just somewhere a little bit more exciting. So yes, on reflection, 41 Longfield Street is not a radical departure in sound for Four Tet, but rather a very gentle and restrained addition to his considerable catalogue. It feels a little bit harsh to say it was a disappointment for me, but maybe it was just not quite in line with my expectations, having read a little bit of the hype beforehand. Four Tet is such an accomplished producer and possesses an apparently bottomless knowledge of musical history and genre interconnectedness. He could bring almost any collaborator into his musical world and create something brilliant and also recognisably Four Tet. So 41 Longfield Street certainly bears that trademark touch, and fans of his more mellow work would surely find plenty to enjoy here. Just don't call it Folktronica. Okay, that is it from me. If you're still watching at this point, please give the video a like and please check out my channel for more electronic music reviews. Until next time, bye bye.